Welcome to USA Stories channel that we hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. It was one of those hot summer days, the kind where everything feels lazy and slow. But something about the way my best friend was acting caught me off guard. I had been friends with Isabella for years, but what she told me that afternoon still haunts me. I always thought I knew everything about her, but thesis was something I never saw coming. I didn't know it then, but that day would change everything. It all started when she invited me over to her family farm. Now you have to understand, I've been to that farm countless times, and it was always just a peaceful place. The barn smelled of hay, there were chickens clucking around and the faint sound of goats bleating in the distance. But today Isabella seemed different. She was acting distant, distracted, almost like she was hiding something. At first I thought maybe it was just the heat or the stress of running a farm, but there was this strange tension in the air. She led me to the back of the barn where I saw her cute donkey, Edward. I had seen Edward before, but today he seemed different too. There was something oddly intimate in the way Isabella interacted with him, a closeness I couldn't quite place. She spoke to him in a soft voice, almost like he was a person brushing his mane, as if he were a dear friend rather than an animal. I felt a knot twist in my stomach. The more I watched them, the more uncomfortable I became. But I couldn't quite put my finger on why. As the day wore on, Isabella seemed more and more engrossed in Edward's company, and the strange behavior didn't stop there. I noticed little things, the way she would smile at him, the way she laughed at his antics, but there was something about it that felt off, like a line was being crossed. I couldn't help but feel like I was witnessing something. I wasn't supposed to see something private, and yet I couldn't pull myself away. At that point, my gut told me something was wrong. I should have walked away, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed caught in the pull of curiosity. I should have trusted that feeling in my C*******T. That sense of unease that kept growing stronger with every passing minute. But I didn't, and I would soon realize that not walking away would come with consequences. Consequences I couldn't have possibly prepared for. As the day ended, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I tried to push it out of my mind, but it lingered like a shadow following me everywhere. Little did I know the things I was about to discover would change my understanding of my best friend forever. What happened next, I could never have imagined. That night I couldn't sleep, no matter how many times I turned over in bed. My mind kept going back to the way Isabella looked at Edward, the way she spoke to him, like he was more than just a pet. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was just Sarah's way of showing love for an animal she had raised since she was a kid. But something in my gut told me it was more than that. The next morning Isabella texted me acting like nothing was wrong. She wanted me to come back to the farm, saying she had something exciting to show me, a part of me. Hesitated. Every instinct told me not to go, that I should just leave it alone. But Isabella was my best friend. I couldn't just ignore her. So against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived, she was already waiting for me by the barn, a big smile on her face. "I have a surprise," she said, grabbing my hand and pulling me toward the back. My stomach twisted as we approached Edward's stall. He was standing there, calm as ever, chewing on some hay. Isabella was practically glowing with excitement. "I don't think I've ever told you the full story about Edward," she said, her voice almost dreamy. I forced a smile, trying to act normal. "No, I guess not," I replied, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. She leaned against the stall, gently stroking Edward's neck. "We've been through so much together." She started when my parents were fighting all the time, when I felt like I had no one. Edward was always there. Her voice softened, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes, something deep, almost desperate. "He understands me in a way no one else ever has." I nodded slowly, feeling my unease grow. I knew Isabella had a rough home life. Her parents were always on the verge of splitting up, and she spent most of her time at the farm avoiding their arguments. But something about the way she was talking sent chills down my spine. "I tell him everything," she continued, turning to me with an intense look, "and he listens. He actually listens more than any person ever has." A nervous laugh slipped out of me. "I mean, yeah, animals can be great for that," I said, trying to keep the mood light. She shook her head. "No, it's more than that." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Edward knows things. No one else does." My breath caught in my throat. "What do you mean?" She hesitated for just a second before leaning in closer. I can't explain it, she said. But if you stay long enough, you'll see a cold shiver ran down my spine. I knew then that I had walked into something much bigger than I could understand, and it was too late to turn back. I wanted to brush it off as just Isabella being overly attached to her cute donkey. But the way she looked at me like she was sharing some great secret made my skin crawl. I forced a small laugh. Okay. So what exactly am I supposed to see? She just smiled. Stay the night? I'll show you. Something about her tone made it clear that she wasn't joking. I swallowed hard, my instincts screaming at me to say no. But the way she was looking at me, almost pleading, made it impossible to refuse. Isabella had been my best friend for years. If she needed me to stay, I would. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I found myself sitting in Sarah's dimly lit barn, watching as she moved around with Edward like they had their own secret language. Every so often she'd glance at me as if waiting for me to notice something. But notice what? Then something strange happened. The air in the barn felt heavier, like a pressure building in the room. Edward stood perfectly still, his dark eyes locked onto mine. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Isabella stepped beside him, resting a hand on his back. He knows things, she whispered again. A long silence stretched between us before Isabella spoke again, her voice barely above a breath. Edward told me something about you. I froze, my throat went dry. What? She tilted, her head slightly, watching me like she was waiting for a reaction. Something you haven't told anyone. I felt my stomach drop. There was no way she could know. No one knew. But the look in her eyes told me she wasn't bluffing. I had walked into something far beyond my understanding, and I wasn't sure if I could walk back out. My whole body tensed. I wanted to believe she was messing with me, that this was some weird joke, but something about the way she said it, so calm, so sure, made my skin prickle. I forced a shaky laugh. Come on, Isabella, that's not funny. She didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. It's not a joke. The barn suddenly felt too quiet, too still. Edward hadn't moved. He was just staring at me, his dark eyes deep and unreadable. A part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from that place as possible, but my legs wouldn't move. I swallowed hard. What did he say? Isabella hesitated, as if deciding how much to tell me. Then, in a slow, deliberate voice, she said, "He knows what you did." A cold chill spread through my C********T. What are you talking about? She took a step closer, her eyes locked on mine. You think no one saw, but Edward did. He told me everything. My pulse pounded in my ears. This was insane. It wasn't possible she couldn't know. No one could know. But the way she was looking at me, the eerie stillness in the air, made my stomach twist. You don't have to hide it from me, she continued, her voice softer, now almost comforting. Edward doesn't judge, he understands. My breath came in short, uneven gasps. I didn't know what scared me more, the fact that she was saying these things, or the small, terrifying part of me that believed her. Then Edward moved, just a small shift, but enough to send my heart racing. Isabella smiled. You're not leaving until you listen. And in that moment I knew I was trapped. I felt trapped, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure Isabella could hear it. The barn seemed smaller now, the air thick and suffocating. Edward stood still, his dark eyes reflecting the dim light, unblinking, watching. I wanted to run, but my body refused to move. Isabella took another step toward me, lowering her voice to a whisper. He told me about that night. My breath caught in my throat number. She couldn't mean that there was no way. I forced myself to stay calm. Isabella, you're scaring me, I said, my voice shaking despite my best effort. She smiled, but there was something off about it, something that sent a chill through me. You're scared because you know it's true, she said. Edward remembers. The words sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I hadn't told anyone what happened that night. No one was there. No one saw. But Isabella was looking at me like she knew every terrible detail. I took a slow step back. I don't know what you're talking about. Isabella let out a soft chuckle. You're still lying. She turned to Edward, running her fingers through his mane. You don't have to pretend anymore. Just listen. Then something happened that I still can't explain. The barn lights flickered for just a second, casting strange shadows across the wooden walls. A sharp gust of wind rushed through the open doors, rattling the beams above us. And then Edward moved again, this time stepping forward closer to me, his large frame blocking the exit. My mouth went dry. "Isabella," I said. "Slowly, I need to go." She shook her head. "Not yet." My pulse raced as she pulled something from her pocket, a small folded piece of paper. She held it out to me, her eyes locked onto mine. "You dropped this," she said. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. I hadn't dropped anything. I hadn't even been carrying anything. But as I reached out with trembling fingers and unfolded it, my stomach dropped. It was a note, my note, the one I had written the night. Everything changed. I could barely breathe as I read my own words, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "No one can ever know." I looked up at Isabella, my vision blurring with panic. "Where did you get this?" She just smiled. "Edward told me." My hands trembled as I gripped the note. My own handwriting stared back at me. Proof of something I had buried deep inside. My throat tightened. "Isabella, this isn't possible. Tu got rid of this." Isabella tilted her head slightly, her expression eerily calm. "You thought you did?" I could barely think straight. My mind raced back to that night. The one I had spent months trying to forget. The one I had convinced myself was nothing more than a terrible mistake. But now standing in that barn with Isabella and Edward watching me like they knew my every thought, the memory came, flooding back like a dam. Breaking the road had been dark. The rain had made it nearly impossible to see. I wasn't supposed to be driving that late, but I had no choice. I just wanted to get home, and then out of nowhere, a shadow darted in front of my car. There was no time to react. The sickening thud still echoed in my nightmares. I had pulled over, my heart racing. But when I got out there was nothing, no body, no tracks, just the endless rain washing everything away. I told myself it was an animal, it had to be. But the fear, the guilt had never left me. And now somehow Isabella knew. I looked up at her. My breathing uneven. "How do you know about that night?" She smiled, faintly stroking Edward's neck. "You still don't get it, do you?" Her voice was soft, almost sad. Edward saw the barn. Suddenly felt ice cold. My pulse pounded in my ears as I took a step back. "That doesn't make sense." I whispered. "Edward wasn't there." Isabella let out a slow breath, not in the way you think. She met my eyes. And for the first time I saw something flicker in them. "Pity. You never hit an animal that night." My C****** T tightened. "What are you saying?" She held my gaze. "You hit someone." The room spun. My knees nearly buckled. That wasn't possible. There was no way. Isabella stepped closer, lowering her voice, and the worst part, she whispered. "They never found the body." A wave of nausea crashed over me. My vision blurred, and then, as if sensing my unraveling, Edward let out a low, deep sound, a sound that almost felt like a warning. I had spent months convincing myself I was innocent, but Edward knew the truth, and so did Isabella. I stood there, frozen, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The barn felt like it was closing in on me, the air thick with something I couldn't explain. My mind raced, trying to process what Isabella had just said. I wanted to deny it, to call her crazy, to insist that she was wrong. But deep down in the part of me I had been trying to silence for months, I knew I had felt it that night. The moment my car hit something. The way my stomach twisted. The way my hands shook as I stared out into the rain, expecting, no dreading, to see a pair of lifeless eyes staring back. But I never did, and that had been the only thing keeping me sane, the only thing letting me believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't what I feared. But Sarah's words shattered that illusion in an instant. I forced myself to speak, my voice barely a whisper. "How do you know?" Isabella exhaled slowly, her fingers still tracing absent patterns in Edward's mane. "Because I've seen them." My blood ran cold. Them. She nodded. "Edward isn't just an animal to me, he's a witness." Her voice dropped lower. "And sometimes he sees what others can't." I didn't know what to believe anymore. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had done something far worse than I ever let myself admit. Or maybe Isabella had just convinced herself of something that wasn't real. Either way, I couldn't stay there any longer. "I have to go," I said, my voice cracking. Isabella didn't try to stop me. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. Leaving won't change the truth. I turned and walked out of the barn, my legs unsteady beneath me. The night air hit my face like a slap, but it did nothing to clear my thoughts. My car was parked just beyond the fence, and I forced myself toward it, every step feeling heavier than the last. As I reached the door, I hesitated. A strange feeling crept up my spine, like I was being watched. Slowly I turned back toward the barn. In the dim light, I saw Edward standing in the doorway, his dark eyes locked onto mine, and for the briefest moment I swore I saw something else standing behind him, something I couldn't explain. I didn't wait to look closer. I got in my car, started the engine and drove away. But no matter how far I went, I knew the truth would follow me because Isabella was right. Some things, some mistakes never stay. If you enjoyed this suspenseful story and want to hear more, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more thrilling content.